Welcome to Brief Encounters, the podcast of the DC Bar Communities, where we bring you conversations with DC Bar members and guests on timely issues shaping the legal profession. Today's show is hosted by the DC Bar, together with the Women's Bar Association of DC, or WBA. In today's episode, to celebrate Law Day, we're excited to feature Dr. Annette Weerth, who will share all about her role and responsibilities as Consul General and Legal Advisor at the German Embassy in Washington, D.C. Our moderator is WBA board member Tamara Kraljic, who will introduce Annette in more detail. I'm honored now to give a brief introduction for Tamara. Tamara is counsel in the Washington, D.C. office of Hughes Hubbard Reed LLP, where she advises international clients on cross-border compliance, enforcement, and dispute resolution. A European native, fluent in French, German, and English, Tamara maintains strong ties to the European business, diplomatic, and tech communities in the D.C. region. Tamara is a future of work enthusiast and a recognized advocate for and frequent speaker on tech, innovation, and gender equity. She is part of a 12-member nationwide advisory council on the use of AI organized by the American Bar Association. Welcome, Tamara.
Thank you so much, Kathy. I'm delighted to be back on Brief Encounters, and thank you so much for the kind introduction. And I am, as I said, delighted today to welcome Dr. Annette Weerth to Brief Encounters. Annette is the Consul General and Legal Advisor at the German Embassy in Washington, D.C. In this role, she is deeply involved in strengthening German-American relations, advancing transatlantic legal dialogue, and convening thoughtful conversations on the rule of law, accountability, and democratic institutions. Topics that are particularly fitting as we celebrate Law Day in DC on May 1st. We are truly honored to have Annette and hear more about her day-to-day work at the embassy, and we are sure that her insights on the law and diplomacy, two of the favorite subjects, if I may say, of all Washington lawyers, will be much appreciated by the audience of Brief Encounters. I just want to add on a more personal note that Annette and I have also become friends since she moved to Washington a couple of years ago, and I've truly appreciated and enjoyed being invited to some truly wonderful gatherings at her home, where diplomacy often continues after hours and where the youngest of her 4 children regularly doubles quite professionally as the evening's waitress. It's a reminder that behind important public roles are very real people, families, and relationships that make this work both human and enduring. So with that said, Annette, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Tamara. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you, guys. It's a pleasure. Annette, for our listeners who may not be familiar with how consulates work day to day and how the embassy works, could you start by explaining your role as Consul General and Legal Advisor here in Washington, D.C.?
Yes, of course. First of all, thank you for inviting me as a guest to your podcast and for your lovely introduction. It's really a privilege to be on the DC Bar podcast, which is done together with the Women's Bar Association today, and to work with you and your wonderful colleagues. It is one of the great things this job as a diplomat and especially Consul General in the United States entails. It is meeting so interesting and legally engaged people, exchange views on different approaches, and work together on wonderful transatlantic legal projects. And this already brings me to your question. As Consul General and Legal Advisor at the Embassy in DC, I have a very exciting and diverse portfolio, and if I may say so, a great playing field for a lawyer. I am, of course, first and foremost the head of the consular section in DC, overseeing all the services related to passports, visas, supporting German nationals who have been detained or are in crisis situations, and other consular services for both German nationals and foreigners. I also have a coordinating function between the 8 consulate generals across the US Germany has, and the approximately 40 honorary consuls we have throughout the country, and all of whom offer consular services as well. And if I may say so, one of the most humbling tasks I have as Consul General is conducting naturalization ceremonies for Jewish individuals and their descendants who lost their German nationality during the Nazi regime. And they have a constitutional right now to regain the German citizenship if they wish, and handing out their naturalization certificates and celebrating this incredibly significant and for many of them not easy step is always, for me as German diplomat, a very, very deeply moving moment. And it's not only an opportunity to hear about their personal family fates and experiences, which actually always gives me goosebumps, but also a possibility for us to give them kind of something back, part of their identity. So this is the consular part. And in my second function as legal advisor, I have the opportunity to engage with important current legal issues and developments in the US-German relationship. These could range from international law, like the ICC, seabed mining, Ukraine, to constitutional matters, such as federal sovereign immunity and other aspects. My tasks there are threefold. First, to follow and report on significant legal developments that may be of interest in Germany, for example, tariffs, cases, social media rulings, new legislative projects, and constitutional debates, and also to explain Germany's position, sometimes also lobbying for US support for a certain stance. And then secondly, my task is to accompany delegations, German delegations in legal matters and find interesting people to talk to, such as constitutional judges, parliamentarians, exploring legal aspects, or government representatives in discussions with US authorities. And the third task is to foster exchanges on important legal developments on both sides of the Atlantic. This allows both sides to learn from each other's legal approaches, address myths, improve systems, and possibly support common international approaches on certain issues. We also try to facilitate this through individual exchanges and meetings, such as we're often having, and roundtables and panel discussions. So quite a diverse portfolio, which makes it really exciting.
Thank you so much. This is a wonderful overview of the two sort of hats that you're wearing. And yeah, if I may just comment on the consular role and the importance of the naturalization process. I follow that. I saw your LinkedIn post. You regularly post on that. And it appears to be a very moving ceremony. So I can only imagine that that's a very fulfilling part. And as for the legal part, we'll get to that a little bit more later. But yes, I have certainly been benefited from these get-togethers with you at the embassy, and I've also had the pleasure of introducing you to some of my colleagues here at Hughes Hubbard. And they met parliamentarians on LGBTQ issues, all these things. And I've truly appreciated our collaboration in that regard. So thank you for this overview. I don't think, this will be, as I said, it's such a fitting, you're like the perfect combination for the Brief Encounters audience because you're both diplomacy and the law. And so I do hope that our listeners are a little bit more clued up about what consul generals do at all these embassies that are here in DC. Let me talk about DC just here again. And we're recording this conversation on the occasion of Law Day in DC Law Day, which is, for those people who don't know, it's celebrated every year on May 1st by the legal community and broader public here in DC to really mark a commitment to the rule of law. And the celebrations notably include a gathering at the steps of the United States Supreme Court. And there are speeches by prominent lawyers and advocates and lawmakers. And it's quite an important event. From your perspective, why is Law Day still relevant and perhaps increasingly so today?
Well, if I'm correct, Law Day has already a long tradition in the United States. It was established already in 1958 by President Eisenhower to celebrate the rule of law, the American legal system, and its role in promoting equality and justice. And it encourages understanding of how legal systems protect freedom and democracy. In Germany, we do not have a specific law day. What might be closest to it is the day we celebrate our constitution, the Grundgesetz, which is on May 23rd, the anniversary of its enactment in 1949. And this day marks the enshrinement of the rule of law, fundamental civil rights and democracy in Germany after the horrific events of the Holocaust. And it was a crucial step for reinstating and preserving democracy and the rule of law after the Nazi regime in Germany. And although in the Weimar Republic, which was created after World War I and was actually the first parliamentarian democracy, Germany had already laid down some groundwork for the rule of law and democracy. And the Weimar Constitution also had basic rules on the separation of power and the rule of law. But as we all know, this republic failed and the atrocities of the Nazi regime could still happen, although we had enshrined things in the Constitution. And now the 1949 Constitution, after the Second World War and the Nazi atrocities, tried to fill some loopholes and to make rule of law more resilient. We even included articles with an eternity guarantee, meaning that these articles and core values like the inviolability of human dignity and the federal states cannot be changed or abolished, and that these rights are untouchable. But the 1949 Constitution is also a remembrance that the rule of law should never be taken for granted, and that we always have to keep defending it. Even if you have main principles enshrined in a constitution like the Weimar Constitution, and even now our constitution, it doesn't secure it. So it's a good guarantee, but still nowadays it is important to be aware of this achievement of the rule of law and to celebrate it on Law Day, but also to remind ourselves that we must continue to safeguard it.
Absolutely. And to the extent that you don't have anything planned on May 1st at the embassy, I invite you personally to join. I think some of our Women's Bar Association sisters will probably be at the Supreme Court, as some of us were last year. So this is a fun gathering. Thank you also for this comparison with the way that the German Grundgesetz handles it and the eternity clauses, which is quite insightful and different from the US system in that regard. Let's shift gears maybe a little bit. You're a trained lawyer, obviously, which in Germany, for those who don't know, means that you have a minimum of 10 years of legal studies under your belt. They're without a doubt the finest jurists in Europe and probably the world, if I may say so. And many of your initiatives sit at the intersection of law and diplomacy in your current role. How does legal culture shape Germany's approach to international engagement?
Well, I have to come back again to our history and our constitution with its commitment to the rule of law, democracy, and fundamental rights, and its significant step to ensure that history, particularly the horrors of the Nazi regime culminating in the Holocaust, would never repeat again. It was an important step to reinstate and safeguard liberty, security, and prosperity in Germany. And similarly, Germany strongly believes that in the international legal order, it is a key factor for peace, security, and prosperity in the world to have kind of legal rules. That is why Germany has promoted and adhered to many international treaties and organizations and continues to defend these instruments and to advocate, of course, for their respect. And even today, the prohibition of force in the UN Charter remains a main guarantor for peace and stability, as does the respect, for example, for fundamental human rights in peacetime and during conflicts. And equally, Germany also believes that achieving stability in peaceful societies is difficult without accountability for the most egregious crimes. So really, to reach and safeguard liberty, security, and prosperity throughout the world, we believe that it needs some kind of legal order.
Thank you. And you have alluded several times to how Germany, but in particular you and the German embassy here, have dealt with the horrors or are dealing with the important task of remembering that the horrors of the Holocaust and ensuring that this doesn't happen again. And here I want to just mention a recent initiative that you actually, under your leadership, the German embassy has conducted at the occasion of the 80th anniversary of the Nuremberg trials, where, as I'm sure our audience will be familiar, the Nuremberg trials where top Nazi officials were prosecuted for war crimes and crimes against humanity, basically establishing modern international law, right? And I think, if I recall correctly, the German embassy had organized several discussions and a viewing of a movie on the Nuremberg trials. Can you talk a little bit about that initiative and why it's so representative of the efforts that you already touched upon in your previous responses, and why is this historical moment still so central to contemporary conversations about the rule of law?
Sure. And Nuremberg is not only so essential for Germany, but when we did the movie showing and also this panel discussion, I just became aware of how it also created the transatlantic link, because it was the Allies and it was Justice Jackson, who at those times Supreme Court Justice, was a very important actor in bringing the Nuremberg trials forward. So Nuremberg was the first time, it's so important because it was the first time war criminals were held accountable by an international tribunal. And this sent not only a strong message to victims, but also to perpetrators. Victim families and survivors saw that in the end, the law prevailed and that crimes and injustices were punished. And at the same time, the trials sent this clear message to potential perpetrators as well that war crimes would not go unpunished. And this was the first time after the Nazi regime that this really happened internationally. And Nuremberg trials also developed important international criminal law principles, the Nuremberg Principles, which became then the foundation for international criminal law and accountability. And that's why it's so important even today, because thanks to the really courageous actions of the Allies in conducting the Nuremberg trials and developing core principles of international accountability, nowadays accountability for war crimes has become a widely recognized core pillar of the international order. Today, we can look at tribunals like the one for the former Yugoslavia, for Rwanda, the Khmer Rouge, and of course the ICC. And now we have the emerging tribunal also for Ukraine. So accountability has really become a widely recognized cornerstone for peace and stability because of Nuremberg, the Nuremberg Principles, and this really incredible approach by the Allies at that time.
Thank you so much. And of course, when you mentioned the ICC, again, I'm sure the audience will be aware, but you're referencing the International Criminal Court sitting in The Hague, Netherlands, where a lot of these war crimes are prosecuted. Thank you so much for that. And I really thank you for the important programming that you're doing around this important anniversary of the horrors of the Second World War. I know that as a grandchild of a survivor of the Holocaust, it means a lot to me personally as well. And I think you've done an excellent job at it. So thank you for your leadership there. I think other than the, big, large panel discussions that you've mentioned, and obviously film viewings and other events, one of the events that you have organized and that you are really leading at the German embassy, which I have so much enjoyed, are these small roundtables that you've regularly convened at the embassy. And both Kathy and I actually have participated in one of your recent roundtables where you invited several representatives of the legal community from different countries, from European countries, from the United States, from voluntary and mandatory bar associations, to talk about the topic of the rule of law. Can you tell me a little bit more about these initiatives? I have to say, frankly, I don't know if the embassy did them at the same frequency before you arrived. I know that I've really enjoyed them. Can you tell me more about these roundtables from your perspective as the organizer, and why do you think they're so effective? And what the format is? It's Chatham House rules. We keep the content of the conversations, but I'll let you talk more.
That's right. That's one of the secrecies, I would say, of these roundtables, which I'm actually not aware whether my predecessor did them. Because, of course, legal issues change, current legal issues, so he might have had other discussions. But and we were so glad to have you and Casey also on the roundtables and all your input. I think that's so important. And the roundtables itself, I thought of this format because it gives a more private and intimate way of exchanging views. And in addition to fostering public dialogue, which we are doing with panel discussions on issues of common concern, it's, I think, equally important to discuss certain topics in a smaller, more confidential format with real experts. This allows for more open exchange, of course, of ideas because participants are not speaking in public forum. As you said, it's Chatham House rules. It also encourages, of course, brainstorming. It allows for a more honest sharing of motivations and helps so to better understand everybody and the other side, which is important to find common grounds. And this format allows then for the development of common solutions also and next steps, because you have brainstorming, you try to understand the other side and then maybe see, okay, we can agree on this and this might be next step we can do. Or you can just see, okay, they have a different approach and see whether you should also include something of their approach in your approach. And of course, at the same time, this more intimate format fosters networking among experts, because there are normally only about, I think we had 10, 15 people, including some virtually from the other side of the Atlantic. it allows this networking so that in the future, in the best case, you wouldn't even need us as embassy, as facilitator, because you already have direct contact and can discuss these important issues between you. But we are happy to continue on this.
I would definitely not forego the pretzels at the German embassy for anything. I love cutting there and eating the authentic German brezen. So to the extent that you are comfortable, and actually you were mentioning other representatives in these roundtable discussions from across the pond, but the wonderful thing about Washington, D.C., and I recall the last roundtable that I participated in on the rule of law and frankly, the role of lawyers in upholding the rule of law. The wonderful thing about that roundtable discussion is, yes, we had, representatives from Europe on Zoom, but we also had them around the table because we are in Washington, D.C. And that's the wonderful thing that you can invite, your colleagues and homologues from other embassies that are already in D.C. And that I think truly does add to the candor and to the intimacy of the meeting. I think there is a true relationship building there as well. As you mentioned, there's both a networking, but beyond networking, it's truly relationship building and sharing views. So I truly appreciated that. And if I may, if you're comfortable on that, the last topic that we discussed was on the role that lawyers play beyond client representation in sustaining democratic institutions and cross-border trust. What are your views on that? What are your views on the role of lawyers, if you care to share them here?
Well, as I said, lawyers are a very important pillar of maintaining the rule of law. They give their oath on the Constitution. It's their profession to bring justice for their clients. And therefore, I feel that they have an important role in upholding the rule of law and defending it. So a legal system and the Constitution are only as strong as they are respected. And for this, we need lawyers. Professionals who have sworn, as I said, to uphold the Constitution. Lawyers are essential in defending the legal order and justice. And even courts would not function effectively without lawyers who can argue cases persuasively and help clients navigate the law. So lawyers ensure the rule of law is upheld, which builds trust also in the foreign legal system, which is important if you want to have a transatlantic exchange of companies or tourists who want to come over, that they know and have confidence that the law is applied fairly and justly, and that legal remedies are available in case of injustice.
And was there anything that surprised you that you took away from convening all, or generally not this one particular conversation, but what happens to you personally when you have this roundtable of lawyers trained in different legal systems with different experiences, some private practitioners, others work for the government? What is something that you take away from that beyond the topic of conversation?
It was indeed a little bit magic, because you see that after posing some questions, the discussion really develops and people find out that they are confronted with the same challenges and they might have different approaches and tell about the different approaches and then come together to see what might be best done about it and whether they should do something more together. And it was really to see the dynamic, although some of the people already knew each other, but they might not have heard so clearly the thoughts and the ideas of the other side. So it again showed that with concrete questions and then maybe also follow-up questions and then allowing for different perspectives to come in, that oftentimes the discussion, when there's really a topic, develops on itself. And everybody at the end goes away and says, wow, I really learned something, and wants to keep on talking to these colleagues from the other side of the Atlantic or within DC.
Or the other side of the aisle, political aisle as well. I think that's important. Yeah. Also something that you have emphasized that I think, I have now lived in DC in 13 years, and in my personal view, and obviously I think it's shared by a lot of people, it is such a divided town. It's a divided country. And so I think you have done a great job at inviting people with not just diverse legal backgrounds, but also diverse political opinions to really come around and talk and stop this sort of complete divide where there's no communication. And same with your panels where you have invited, a recent one that I've attended that was extremely interesting was where you had Justice Alito, as well as basically one of his counterparts in Germany at the German highest constitutional court, that was also a very interesting conversation and I think important to always have that diversity of opinion there. Let's move a little bit away from the legal side and more into the diplomacy side of the conversation here, because much of your work also focuses on engaging states and cities and professional groups and civil society. So particularly, I want to talk about the importance here of subnational diplomacy, which is, diplomacy that happens at that level of the states, of the cities, or professional groups, especially when traditional diplomatic channels seem to be under strain these days. How do you see the role of subnational diplomacy, and how do you encourage subnational diplomacy through your programming at the German embassy?
Yes, thank you. This is a really important question. The goal, as you know, of diplomacy is to establish relationships with other countries in order to prevent conflicts and promote peace, security, and prosperity. And of course, it's important to engage with those who govern and take the major decisions. But it's equally important to build relationships with regional decision makers, players, and communities, those who influence investments, regional corporations, academic partnerships, cultural exchange, student and tourism exchanges, and the promotion of German culture. So in the end, it's the people who travel to Germany, who learn German and immerse themselves in our culture, and the Germans who study or work in the US or even innovate in US laboratories. They really foster deeper mutual understanding of our two countries and strengthen the relationship between our countries, which is one of the main aims of diplomacy. And these connections create shared values, a common understanding, and important interconnections and partnerships on the very grassroots level that contributes to peace and security and prosperity of our two nations, our two societies. So I think it's a very important pillar of diplomacy, especially in those really, really big countries like the United States, to go to the countryside as well.
To leave the swamp, as we like to call Washington, D.C. affectionately. Absolutely. And, actually, I'm personally looking forward, and you mentioned important events. I think one very important event in subnational diplomacy is coming up this summer, and that's the FIFA World Cup. I am looking forward. I'm certainly going to host some World Cup watch parties in my home. I hope maybe the embassy does too, and we can,
Yeah, I also hope.
But I think, being hosted in the US, the sport that's gathering support, I'm very excited about it. So that's a fun example of subnational diplomacy that is coming up, and where Team Germany in the US will matter. But for the purposes of, again, this audience, which is more focused on diplomacy and the law, not necessarily soccer, I want to talk about a different kind of Team Germany in the United States. And we referred to it earlier in your introduction, and that is the team of honorary consuls. And can you talk a little bit more about the role and what they are, really? What are honorary consuls of Germany? And why are they so important in complementing formal diplomacy?
Sure. Germany, as I said earlier, I think we have not only 8 consulate generals throughout the United States, so those are really foreign missions from Germany, but we also have 40 honorary consuls across the United States in different cities, and their responsibility is also for different states. And these honorary consuls are mostly American citizens. Sometimes they have German and American citizenship. They are based in the United States, normally have some kind of connection to Germany. It's good if they speak German, but not all of them speak really German because they offer consular services. They're nominated also by our president of Germany and get their certificate and are recognized as those from the US Foreign Ministry. So they have certain consular obligations for German citizens, especially, like notarizing different things and, of course, helping Germans in crisis situations. And now that we have the World Cup, they might also guide German citizens, German fans, if need be. Some of them also accept passport applications, which is very important for us because then the Americans don't have to travel like 5 hours, 6 hours to get to the consulate and only need to go to the honorary consul. But they don't just offer consular services. They also act as ambassadors of Germany in their regions. They also foster academic partnerships, establish sister city relations, coordinate school exchanges and promote cultural activities like Oktoberfest, or they did some Spargel competition, and they support economic cooperation.
For those who don't know, that's asparagus. Asparagus is a very important vegetable in Germany, and we're entering the asparagus time. And for those who haven't experienced it, Germany goes into an asparagus frenzy. People only eat asparagus. They put asparagus on their pizza. They put asparagus on their pasta, everywhere. And it's something quite that you can only understand once you've seen it. But yes, so that's Spargel. Spargel is asparagus in German, very important. Sorry, I just jumped in to make that translation, both literal and cultural, although I'm not sure that can be really translated, actually.
Yeah, that's right. I already miss it. And it's the white asparagus, because you have a lot of the green asparagus and it's really hard to find the white one. So I really miss it. And as you said, they're already starting the season in Germany. It's a big thing. And they did this asparagus competition. I was really amazed. And of course, the honorary consuls also create their network in the region with key institutions and organizations. So whenever a German visitor comes over, or they have German companies want to invest in that area, they are there to help, to support, and are really, really important eyes and ears in the region for us. And also at the same time, they can present German views on different things. So ambassadors for Germany. These actors play a really crucial role in decentralizing diplomacy and ensuring that we maintain strong ties at all levels, not just through formal diplomatic channels.
Thank you. That's very interesting. It is truly fascinating. I mean, I think all countries have honorary consuls. Is that right?
I think most of the countries, yeah.
The link, I guess, importantly, too, you don't even have to speak German, but there has to be some kind of connection to Germany and a willingness to contribute. I don't know how you apply, but maybe to our listeners that feel strongly, maybe approach you. But it seems like a very important role. And again, in this time where traditional diplomatic channels are maybe more under strain, also a very effective way of making sure the dialogue continues between the two countries, two old friends, Germany and the United States. Without getting too political here, but what lessons have you learned being here, the General Consul in the United States in Washington, D.C., which is without a doubt the most important embassy that Germany has around the world, I believe. What lessons have you learned about maintaining dialogue and trust in more, let's say, polarized environments?
You know, the essence of diplomacy is dialogue and communication. And this is true not only when you share the same opinion, but especially when you have different opinions. And actually only gets interesting then when you have different opinions, diplomacy. And in such cases, it's essential to try to really understand the other side's motivations and their interests and their reasoning in order to find common grounds, to understand their approach, or at least maintain peaceful relations. Ideally, of course, both sides should strive to find a solution that's acceptable to both. But even if in the end you agree to disagree, it is important that you really agree on that. And by agreeing on to disagree, you acknowledge and really respect the other's opinion, which is the most important thing of communication, because otherwise there's no communication if you don't respect the other's opinion. And of course, the same is true for any democracy. Democracy lives from the different opinions and the dialogue and even long discussions we have in our parliament as well. But it's important to hear all these views. And only if we hear the other side, we might really understand and might get to compromises in the end and find the best solution for all the people. We're learning always as diplomats, but in some situations even more.
Yes, some situations help us and environments help us grow as both professionals and people. And I, for my part, feel like you have done a great job at that at the German embassy. So in conversations you've hosted on constitutional courts, again, as part of your programming at the German embassy, a key theme is legitimacy and public trust. Why does this issue resonate so strongly across borders today, do you think?
Well, I think a key aspect of ensuring accountability and justice is that the institutions responsible for these decisions are accepted by the people and they are supported by them to serve. And there are three main factors for such acceptance, which is first the independence of these institutions. Their decision-making should only be governed by law and not external influence. Secondly, it's legitimacy, their existence, rules and procedures, and the selection process for judges must be legally foreseen and approved by Parliament. And thirdly, transparency, also very important, that their decision-making really should be well-reasoned and understandable to the public. And only if you have all these things, you can make sure that these institutions and their decisions will be accepted. And these prerequisites are also, of course, essential for the rule of law. And they apply not only in Germany, but across all democracies. And today, these principles really resonate strongly because, of course, courts in many countries are under increasing attack. And so we thought it would be good to have kind of a transatlantic exchange on these things, which was really good also to have the different views from different aisles.
Yes, referring to the panel discussion earlier, that it really was truly enlightening, both because of the difference, I believe, in positions, both culturally and politically, and the difference in legal systems. Well, in closing, I think we're getting close to where we need to finish, and I want to give you the opportunity to have some closing thoughts. And given that we are celebrating Law Day today, if there is one Law Day takeaway you would leave our listeners with, what would that be?
Well, I assume most of your listeners are lawyers, but maybe not all of them. And for me, it's really important to send out this message on Law Day that law is not made only for lawyers. It is really made for the people to limit and regulate powers of the government. So law is the foundation of democracy and the rule of law, and it underpins the power of the people. And it is a great achievement and should never be taken for granted, the law. That's why not only lawyers need to defend it as part of their job and professional commitments, but all of us need to stand up for the law, our rights, and the rights of others every single day. And I think it's a wonderful idea that you have this Law Day in the United States.
Thank you. I agree. I think it is wonderful. And so I want to thank you for your wonderful insights today. Again, I think we could have not wished for a better mix of what constitutes Washington on this Law Day, diplomacy and the law. Thank you so much. I also want to thank the DC Bar. And of course, I want to thank our listeners for having dialed into this episode today for DC Law Day. I hope you have enjoyed it.